Let's get some analysis now. I'm joined by the former Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, Mike Pezzullo. Mike, you've written in The Australian today about how Donald Trump is reshaping or will reshape international strategic culture. Can you explain to our viewers what your argument is?
Well, good morning, Kieran. Good to be with you on Remembrance Day. And of course, it's a very solemn day and we remember those who have sacrificed their lives in order to give us freedom. Donald Trump's got an opportunity to use the tremendous leverage of American power. America still is the strongest military power in the world. It's got the strongest economy in the world. It's growing. It's got economic talent, strength, depth, investment potential to really make a difference in the world. If he chooses to, and my piece this morning in The Australian was about the choices that he is presented with. If he chooses to, he can wield that power, yes, in the interests of America first, but let's face it, Kieran, America, like any other nation, always looks after its own interests first, no different from Harry Truman or Ronald Reagan. He can pursue an America first policy, which with like-minded, also self-interested countries makes a real difference to pushing back on autocracies and those who are tyrannically using their power to upset the sort of arrangements that were put in place after the Second World War that have given us so much peace and prosperity.
And your argument is that they'd be willing to extend ongoing security arrangements like with their allies over so many decades, including our own, but nations, friends, particularly allies, NATO, Australia, others, will have to chip in more. That's your case.
Well, Kieran, I think people miss that point of analysis when they think about Trump, and we've already had a first Trump term, so we know the contours of his thinking. Yes, he's America first, but he wants to share the burden more equally and equitably. In his mind, and he said this very consistently and regularly, why should American taxpayers support a defence to spending ratio of GDP, for instance, which is 3.5% and possibly going up to 4%, when others, including those who are in the direct line of fire of China and Russia, are spending closer to 2%. He thinks that's unfair, and simple logic would dictate that if you're going to share the burden equally, you should be doing things like spending a similar amount of money on defence, for instance.
What are the implications for Ukraine, as you see it, and particularly off the back of the news we've just reported on that phone call between Trump and Putin?
Look, I think it's too early to tell, and when you get to how he's going to implement his policies specifically, I think that's going to be a function both of his own decision-making, plus, of course, those that he selects into the key positions of Secretary of State, Secretary of Defence, the National Security Advisor. So it's hard to be definitive. He was asked during the campaign about what his plans were, and he was very clear that he wanted the violence to end, the killing to stop. He's talked about the killing stopping, the conflict rather being stopped within 24 hours. I think we need to pause and think about what that might mean. That might involve a ceasefire or some form of armistice, whilst a longer-term solution that's just and fair and equitable is realised. I think it would be tragic if any peace that's achieved is not enduring and certainly doesn't recognise the sacrifices that the Ukrainian people have made. So ending the conflict might well be something that can be achieved in a day or two. Ceasefires and an armistice, we're commemorating today Armistice Day, is possible, and then you can work on peace arrangements thereafter. I think it's too early to tell, but I think people need to take a layered and nuanced view of how he might go about that. Your
piece in The Australian coincides with another appearance you're making at the Australian Institute of International Affairs alongside Hugh White. Hugh White has argued for a long time a pragmatic approach to China to accommodate the rising power. You have a very different view, and it's interesting. One of the points you make today is Trump will need to be convinced to defend Taiwan. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, a couple of points there. Following the point I made earlier, Taiwan currently spends something like 2.5% of GDP on defence. President Trump might well look at that and say, well, if you're serious about defending your own country, you need to lift it to at least what I'm spending here in the United States. So that's just a basic, if you like, almost business calculation. But the deeper point is this. Trump has campaigned on, and indeed he governed in his first term, on the idea of making America great again. America will not be great if China dominates Eurasia. That is all the land and the littoral areas from Asia right across to Europe. where the bulk of the world's population lives, the bulk of the world's resources are, and the largest markets are. I don't think Donald Trump has run for this election in order to make America second greatest. He is wanting to make America or retain American supremacy, and for China to dominate in Eurasia would be directly contrary to that interest.
Now, you touched on this earlier, and I do want to get your thoughts on this before we go back to the Prime Minister and the National Remembrance Day commemorations. Just your thoughts on how important it is for us as a nation, as a democracy, to remember the service of those that made the ultimate sacrifice, but also those that have served across the conflicts of the last 106 years.
I think, Kieran, whether it's in the First World War, the Second World War, other conflicts, peacekeeping operations, where of course we've also lost men and women, I think it's just terribly important, and it's heartening to see in recent years how I don't think it'll ever get to the same level of prominence as Anzac Day, because Anzac Day is just so special in Australia, but I just think it is heartening to see that the commemoration of Armistice Day, or Remembrance Day as it's variously called, is starting to get up there in terms of national prominence. It's great that you're carrying the coverage that you are. And I think particularly for those who perhaps aren't conversant with that history, can be reminded of the sacrifices that others who have gone before have basically given their lives so that we can have a better tomorrow. It's just so terribly important, and today is such a solemn day from that point of view. It
is. Well, I appreciate you making the time. I know it's a busy day for you with your commitments today with the Institute of International Affairs. I always appreciate your time. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Kieran. Lest we forget.